The village of Riverstone sat nestled in the lush valleys of the kingdom of Eldoria, a place where gossip traveled faster than the cool morning breeze. In this village lived Elara, a young woman with gentle hands and a reputation as a skilled herbalist. Her small cottage near the village square was often visited by those seeking remedies for their ailments, and though her family had little in terms of wealth, they were respected for their honest work and Elara's healing gifts. That is, until Elara began showing interest in the strange man who lived at the edge of the forest. The madman, they called him. Thorne was his name, though few bothered to use it. He had appeared in Riverstone 3 seasons ago, taking residence in an abandoned woodcutter's cottage that leaned precariously to one side. His clothes were often disheveled, his dark hair wild and unkempt, and he spoke in riddles that made little sense to those who encountered him. Sometimes he would stand in the village square, staring at the sky as if receiving messages from the clouds. Other times, he would kneel in the dirt, examining pebbles with the intensity of a jeweler assessing precious gems. Stay away from him, Elara's mother warned when she noticed her daughter watching Thorne with curiosity rather than fear. Nothing good comes from associating with madness. But Elara had always seen what others missed, and in Thorne's eyes, behind the apparent confusion and distant gaze, she glimpsed something else entirely, something that called to her like a mystery waiting to be solved. The first time Elara spoke to Thorne was on a crisp autumn morning when he appeared at her door, cradling a wounded falcon in his large, careful hands. "The sky's messenger has fallen," he said, his voice surprisingly refined despite his appearance. "Can you mend what gravity has broken?" Elara hesitated only briefly before inviting him inside. The falcon's wing was indeed broken, and as she worked to set and bind it, she noticed how Thorne watched her movements with an intelligence that contradicted his reputation. "You have kind hands," he observed. "They speak the language of healing that your mouth need not translate." "My grandmother taught me," Elara replied, surprised by his eloquence. "She said healing is a conversation between the healer and the wounded." "Wise woman." Thorne nodded. In the palace, he stopped abruptly, his eyes darting to the window. In the passing of knowledge, wisdom survives death. This cryptic shift confused Elara, but something about his presence intrigued her. Unlike the others in the village, she didn't feel the need to dismiss him as merely mad. Over the following weeks, Thorne returned regularly, sometimes bringing injured animals, other times rare herbs he'd gathered from parts of the forest few dared to venture into. Each visit revealed new layers to the man the village had so easily labeled and dismissed. "Why do you let them call you mad?" Elara asked one day as they worked side by side, preparing a poultice for old Widow Marin's rheumatism. Thorne's hand stilled. Labels are convenient containers for those who fear what they cannot immediately understand. His eyes, a striking amber in the afternoon light, met hers. What people see is often what they expect to see. "What you see, Elara of Riverstone?" The question lingered between them, weighted with meaning she couldn't fully grasp. "I see someone pretending," she finally answered, surprising herself with her boldness. A smile, brief but genuine, crossed his face. Perhaps we are all pretending in one way or another. Word of their friendship spread quickly. Elara's patience began to dwindle. Her younger siblings reported taunts at the village school. Her father, a carpenter dependent on commissions from fellow villagers, noticed a decline in work. "Whatever fascination you have with a madman," her father said one evening, his voice heavy with concern, "consider the cost to this family." But Elara had glimpsed too much to turn back. In Thorne's company, she found conversations that challenged her mind and silence that soothed her soul. He spoke of distant lands with such vivid detail, discoursed on philosophy and governance with surprising insight, and yet could be moved to childlike wonder by the simplest wildflower. My daughter befriending the lunatic. Her mother lamented to the baker's wife. Unaware Elara could overhear. "I fear where this strangeness will lead her." It led her to love gradually, unexpectedly, and completely. The first time Thorne took her hand, they were walking along the forest path after gathering elderberries. His touch was gentle but certain, his calloused palm evidence of work that belied his supposed madness. "There are worlds within worlds, Elara," he said, looking at their joined hands rather than her face. "Some we are born into, others we choose, and still others we create between two souls. By winter's first snow, Elara knew her heart had chosen a path her village would never understand. Thorne's occasional disappearances, sometimes for days without explanation, concerned her, but his returns were always marked by a quiet joy that mirrored her own. It was during one of these returns that the village's hostility crystallized into something uglier than mere gossip. The madman who returns from a forest, young Tobias, the blacksmith's son, called out as Elara walked through the square. The crowd's uncomfortable laughter pierced deeper than the winter cold. That evening, her family's intervention came like a storm long brewing. "This has gone far enough," her father declared, his normally kind face hardened with resolve. "Your association with that man has brought shame to this family. Your brother was refused apprenticeship with Master Fletcher today directly because of your scandalous behavior." "What scandal?" Elara challenged, her voice trembling but determined. "To show kindness to someone the village has cast out? To see worth where others see only strangeness?" "He is not right in the head, Elara," her mother cried. "Anyone with eyes can see it." "Perhaps I see with more than my eyes," Elara responded quietly. The ultimatum came swiftly: renounce her friendship with Thorne or leave her family home. That night, as snow blanketed Riverstone in pristine white, Elara wept alone in her bed, torn between the family she loved and the man who had awakened something essential within her. At dawn, she packed her few belongings. She found Thorne at the forest's edge, as if he had been waiting for her decision. "They've cast you out," he stated, not questioning. "I chose to leave," she corrected, wiping away a frozen tear. "Then perhaps it's time I ask what I've longed since first seeing you tend to that falcon." He knelt in the snow, seemingly oblivious to the cold seeping through his worn trousers. From his pocket, he produced a simple band of twisted silver. "Will you join your path with mine, Elara? Will you marry a man the world sees as mad?" In his eyes, Elara saw not madness, but a depth of knowing that made the rest of the world seem blind. "Yes," she whispered, as snowflakes caught in her eyelashes. "Yes, I will." Their wedding was held at the first thaw, conducted by a traveling priest who asked few questions and seemed untroubled by the groom's occasional distant stare or cryptic comments. The ceremony took place near a sunlit clearing, witnessed only by the ancient oaks and a handful of forest creatures that seemed oddly drawn to Thorne's presence. Elara wore a simple dress adorned with early spring flowers. Thorne had somehow procured a clean tunic and had tamed his wild hair, revealing handsome features that struck Elara new. When he spoke his vows, his voice carried a commanding presence that seemed to make even the forest hold its breath. When they returned to Riverstone for Elara to collect the rest of her belongings and bid final farewell to her family, the village's reaction was exactly as expected. She actually married him. The whispers followed them like persistent shadows. "The healer's daughter and the madman, what a waste. She'll regret it when she's bearing mad children and living in squalor." Even her family's farewell was strained, her mother's embrace stiff with disapproval, her father unable to meet Thorne's eye. Only her youngest sister, Lily, offered genuine well wishes, slipping a small carved wooden bird into Elara's palm. "For luck," the child whispered. "And so, you remember us when you're far away." Life in Thorne's cottage was simpler than Elara had known, yet filled with unexpected wonders. The structure, which had appeared decrepit from outside, revealed surprising comforts within. The furniture was sparse but finely crafted, the bed covered with linens of a quality Elara had never touched before. Small treasures dotted the shelves of unusual rocks, intricately carved figurines, and several books bound in leather that must have cost a fortune. "How did you acquire such treasures?" she asked one evening as Thorne read to her by firelight, his finger tracing foreign scripts with familiar ease. "Some journeys yield unexpected rewards," he replied, that familiar cryptic smile playing at his lips. But it was the nighttime visitors that first truly unsettled Elara's perception of her new husband. She awoke one midnight to find the cottage empty beside her. Following the sound of hushed voices, she discovered Thorne outside, engaged in intense conversation with two cloaked figures who stood with militant posture. "The northern borders are secure, but Duke Merritt grows restless," one was saying. "Double the guard rotation and send word that I'll address the situation after the spring thaw." Thorne replied, his voice carrying an authority Elara had never heard before. And what of Lord Cassius's request for audience? Denied. His land-grabbing schemes remained transparent despite his flowery correspondence. The men actually bowed to her husband before disappearing into the night. When Thorne returned to bed, Elara feigned sleep, her mind racing with questions she wasn't yet ready to ask. The strange meetings continued. Sometimes messengers would arrive with sealed documents that Thorne would read by candlelight before burning. Other times, finely dressed men would arrive under cover of darkness, speaking in hushed tones about matters of state and security. Elara began to notice other incongruities. Thorne's hands, though calloused, bore the remnants of a signet ring's impression. His knowledge of herbs extended beyond anything she had encountered, yet he claimed no formal training. And sometimes, when startled from deep thought, he would straighten his posture and raise his chin in a manner that spoke of years of very particular training. "Who are you, really?" she finally whispered one night as they lay together, her head on his chest. "The man I married is no madman." His heart quickened beneath her ear. "I am exactly who I needed to be," he answered carefully, "and exactly who you chose to love. But these meetings, these documents, why the secrecy? Why live as an outcast when clearly you are a man of importance?" Thorne's arms tightened around her. "There are truths I must share with you, my love. But not tonight. Tomorrow we'll speak of identities and choices." But tomorrow brought dangers neither had anticipated. Dawn broke with the sound of approaching horses, not the usual messengers with their discreet arrivals, but the thunderous approach of multiple riders with no attempt at secrecy. "Hide!" Thorne commanded. His entire demeanor transformed as he leapt from bed and retrieved a sword Elara hadn't known existed from beneath the floorboards. "Take this and go to the hollow oak we visited last week. Wait for me there." He pressed a heavy gold ring into her palm, a royal seal that made her breath catch. "Thorne, what?" "There's no time. Show this if you're discovered by anyone wearing the royal crest of Eldoria. Now go through the back." Frozen with confusion, Elara might have remained rooted in place had the first arrow not shattered their window. Thorne pushed her toward the back door, then turned to face the intruders with a stance that spoke of years of combat training. Elara ran, the royal seal clutched in her trembling hand, her mind struggling to assemble the fragments of truth that had been scattered throughout their relationship. From the cover of trees, she watched in horror as 5 armed men surrounded their cottage. "Surrender, Thorian," one called out. "Lord Cassius knows you live. Your charade ends today." Thorian. The name echoed in Elara's mind, connecting to whispered tales of the kingdom's young king who had vanished from public life over a year ago. King Thorian of Eldoria, rumored by some to have been assassinated, by others to have gone mad with grief after his father's death. The clash of swords drew her attention back to the cottage. Thorne or Thorian moved with lethal precision, his madman persona completely evaporated. He fought with the disciplined skill of one trained from birth in the art of warfare, quickly dispatching 2 attackers. But he was outnumbered, and when a third man circled behind him, Elara acted without thinking. Grabbing a fallen branch, she charged from her hiding place, striking the would-be assassin with enough force to send him sprawling. "Elara, no!" Thorne shouted, but was too late. One of the remaining men grabbed her, pressing a blade to her throat. "Yield, your majesty, or watch your peasant wife die before your eyes." Time seemed to stand still as Elara's world reconfigured itself around that single word, majesty. The man she had offended against her village's mockery, the supposed madman she had married in defiance of all counsel, was the King of Eldoria. King Thorian lowered his sword, his eyes never leaving Elara's. "Release her. Your quarrel is with me, not an innocent woman deceived by my disguise." "Deceived?" Elara found her voice despite the blade at her throat. "Is that what you think of our marriage?" Something flashed in Thorian's eyes, pain, regret, and beneath it all, a desperate love that no royal mask could conceal. Before he could respond, the forest erupted with new arrival soldiers in royal livery, their swords making quick work of the assassins. Their leader, a gray-haired man with the bearing of a lifetime warrior, stepped forward and knelt before Thorne. "Your Majesty, we've been tracking Lord Cassius's men since they left the capital. Forgive our delayed arrival." "Rise, Commander Aldrich," Thorian replied, his voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of royal authority. "Your timing, while not perfect, was sufficient." As the soldiers secured the area and tended to the bodies of the fallen assassins, Thorian approached Elara cautiously, as if she were a frightened deer that might bolt at any sudden movement. "You're bleeding," she said numbly, noticing the cut across his forearm. "Elara, you're the king." It wasn't a question. "Yes, and I'm the woman I love, the woman I married, and, if you can forgive this deception, the Queen of Eldoria." They sat facing each other in what remained of their cottage home, the royal guards positioned discreetly outside. Commander Aldrich had offered them privacy for this conversation, a courtesy Elara suspected came from years of loyal service to crown. "I was born Prince Thorian," he began, his hands clasped tightly as if to anchor himself to this moment of truth. "Raised to rule, educated by the finest minds in the kingdom, and sheltered from the realities of ordinary life. When my father died suddenly last year, I inherited not only his crown, but also the disturbing realization that I had no true understanding of the people I was meant to govern." He rose, pacing the small space with restless energy. The royal advisor spoke of peasants as abstractions, tax sources, military conscripts, faceless masses. I'd never spoken to a farmer about his crops, never heard a mother's worries for her children's future, never understood the weight of living season, the season hoping the harvest would sustain your family. Elara watched him, this stranger, who was her husband with a heart torn between betrayal and a deeper understanding beginning to take root. "So you abandoned your responsibilities to play commoner?" she challenged. "No," he replied sharply. "I entrusted the daily operations of government to my most loyal advisors, including Commander Aldrich, and embarked on what I believed was essential education for a true king. I traveled throughout Eldoria in disguise, working alongside laborers, listening in taverns, observing the effects of royal policies on ordinary lives. And the madness?" Elara asked, "Was that necessary to your education?" Thorian's expression softened. The eccentricity was initially a shield who questions too deeply the ramblings of a madman, but it also granted me freedoms I'd never known. For the first time in my life, I could speak truths without calculation, act from impulse rather than obligation. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "And then I met you, a healer who looked at a wounded bird and a supposedly broken man with the same compassionate determination to mend what was damaged." Despite herself, Elara felt tears forming. "You could have told me, after we grew close, after you knew you could trust me." "I meant to, countless times. But selfishness kept me silent. As Thorne, I was loved for myself alone, not my crown, not my wealth, not the power I wielded. Can you understand what that meant to someone who has been bowed to since birth?" Outside, the guards were preparing horses. Their time of private reckoning was growing short. "The men who attacked us, they were sent by this Lord Cassius?" Elara asked, still processing the magnitude of these revelations. "My cousin, ambitious and impatient. He likely hoped my extended absence would eventually be accepted as death, paving his path to the throne. When he discovered I was alive and living as a commoner, he must have seen an opportunity to eliminate me quietly. And now I must return to the capital and reclaim my public role before Cassius can consolidate power." His eyes searched hers. "The question is whether I return alone or with my queen." Queen. The word fell foreign. Impossible a fairy tale element dropped into her practical life of herbs and healing. "I'm a village herbalist," she whispered. "I know nothing of courts or governance." "You know more than I did of the people's true needs," Thorian countered. "You see with clarity, judge with compassion, and love with courage. Eldoria will be blessed with such a queen." Commander Aldrich's discreet knock interrupted them. "Your Majesty, we should depart before darkness if we aim to reach the summer palace by nightfall." Thorian nodded, then offered Elara his hand. "I cannot undo my deception, but I can promise no more lies between us. Will you come with me, not as the madman's wife, but as Queen Elara of Eldoria?" The choice before her seemed impossible. Abandon everything familiar to enter a world she'd only heard about in stories, or lose the man she'd grown to love despite, or perhaps because of his mysteries. In the end, It was not grand visions of royalty that decided her, but the memory of Thorne's hands gently cradling a wounded falcon, the sound of his laughter when she had shown him how to braid river reeds, and the knowledge that beneath the title and burden of kingship beat the heart of the man she had chosen. "I will come," she said, placing her hand in his, "not for the crown, but for the truth between us from this day forward." Their journey to the summer palace took them through forests Elara had never ventured into, along roads better maintained than those near Riverstone. As they traveled, Thorian pointed out landmarks and shared histories of the land that revealed his deep knowledge of his kingdom. The summer palace itself nearly stole Elara's breath, not a castle of intimidating stone, but an elegant structure of warm wood and glass that seemed to grow from the hillside it occupied. Guards saluted as they approached. Servants appeared as if from nowhere to attend to their needs, and everywhere eyes followed their king with expressions ranging from relief to curiosity about the woman at his side. "Welcome home, your majesty," an elderly steward greeted them at the entrance, bowing deeply before turning a kind gaze toward Elara. "And welcome to you, my lady. The royal chambers have been prepared as requested." That night, as Elara stood on the balcony of rooms more spacious than her family's entire house, watching Thorian in conference with his advisors in the gardens below, the full weight of her new reality settled upon her shoulders. She was no longer simply Elara, the herbalist. She was the wife of King Thorian, a woman who would be expected to stand beside the throne and help guide the kingdom's future. Strangely, beneath the overwhelming nature of this transformation, she found a core determination. If fate had placed her in this position, she would use it to ensure the voices of people like her family, ordinary Eldorians with ordinary struggles, will be heard within these rarefied walls. The transformation of Thorne back into King Thorian was a marvel to witness. His wild hair was trimmed and styled, his simple clothes replaced with garments of such fine craftsmanship that Elara could scarcely believe the same body wore them. Yet it was his bearing that changed most dramatically, the occasionally stooped posture replaced by a straight-back confidence, the distant gaze focused in the sharp awareness of everyone and everything in his presence. "You seem like a different person," Elara observed as royal tailors fussed over her own measurements for the wardrobe deemed necessary for a queen. "Not different," Thorian corrected gently. "More complete. For the first time, I need not choose between the king and the man. You've given me that gift." The following weeks were a whirlwind of introductions, lessons in protocol, and preparations for Thorian's formal reemergence into public life. Lord Cassius was quietly arrested when evidence of his treasonous plot came to light, though Thorian chose imprisonment rather than execution, a mercy that surprised his advisors, but not Elara, who had seen his compassion even in his madman guise. Throughout these transitions, Elara struggled with her own place in this new world. Court ladies approached her with measured politeness that barely concealed their assessment of her common origins. Council members spoke over her in meetings, until Thorian pointedly requested her opinions. "They will learn to see you as I do," he assured her after a particularly difficult dinner with foreign ambassadors who had barely acknowledged her presence. "Not just as my chosen queen, but as a woman of wisdom in her own right." "And if they never do?" she challenged. His smile turned mischievous, reminiscent of Thorne at his most playful. "Then perhaps the king and his mad queen will simply have to change what it means to rule." The true test came 3 months after their arrival at the capital, when Thorian announced his intention to visit Riverstone, the village that had mocked and shunned them as part of a royal progress through the outlying provinces. "Are you certain?" Elara asked, her stomach tightening at the thought of returning to face those who had judged her so harshly. "Absolutely." Thorian's eyes held the same intensity she had first noticed when he brought her the wounded falcon. "This journey isn't about vengeance, but reconciliation with your family, with your past, and with the beginning of our story." And so it was that on a bright summer morning, the royal procession entered Riverstone, a spectacle of gleaming armor, fluttering banners, and at its center, King Thorian and Queen Elara riding side by side on matched white horses. The village square, where once young Tobias had called her the madman's whore, now filled with stunned villagers dropping to their knees as recognition dawned. Among them, Elara spotted her family, her father's face ashen with shock, her mother's hands covering her mouth, and little Lily's eyes wide with wonder. Thorian dismounted first, then helped Elara down with practiced courtesy that nevertheless conveyed genuine tenderness. The royal herald stepped forward, unrolling a proclamation that announced King Thorian's return from a period of private study throughout the realm, accompanied by his new queen, formerly known to this village as Elara the Herbalist. The collective gasp was audible, followed by a silence so complete that Elara could hear the flutter of royal banners in the breeze. "Rise," Thorian commanded, his voice carrying across the square with natural authority. "We come not in judgment, but in gratitude. It was in this village that I found something kings throughout history have sought, but rarely found the truth of who I am beyond my crown." Elara stepped forward, finding her voice despite the emotion tightening her throat. "And it was here that I learned to trust my heart's vision over the opinions of others." Her eyes found her family in the crowd. "Some of you were kind. Some were cruel. All of you were part of the path that led us here." What followed was perhaps the most unusual royal visit in Eldoria's history. Rather than maintaining formal distance, Thorian and Elara walked among the villagers, accepting awkward bows and curtsies with grace. They visited Elara's family home, where her mother wept a mixture of shame and pride, and her father knelt until Thorian himself raised him up. "Your daughter has taught me more about leadership than a lifetime at court," the king told the stunned carpenter. "You raised a queen long before I placed a crown upon her head." Later, in the village square where a hastily organized feast was underway, Elara found herself face to face with the baker's wife, who had been among the most vocal critics of her relationship with the madman. "Your Majesty," the woman curtsied deeply, her face flushed with embarrassment. We didn't know." "No," Elara agreed, "you didn't, but perhaps that's the lesson worth remembering. We rarely know the full story of anyone we meet." As twilight fell and the royal party prepared to depart, Elara stood at the edge of the village, looking back at the simple houses and familiar pathways of her childhood home. Thorian joined her, placing a warm hand at the small of her back. "Regrets?" he asked softly. She considered the question honestly. "Not regrets. Gratitude. If they hadn't mocked us so cruelly, I might never have found the courage to choose you. If you hadn't played the madman so convincingly, we might never have discovered the truth between us." He smiled, the expression somehow containing both Thorne's free-spirited joy and Thorian's regal confidence. "Then shall we thank them for their mockery?" "Perhaps," Elara laughed. "We should simply thank them for being part of a story neither they nor we could have imagined." As they returned to their waiting entourage, villagers lined the path, bowing not just from obligation, but with new understanding in their eyes. Among them stood young Tobias, the blacksmith's son whose taunts had once cut so deeply. He met Elara's gaze with obvious remorse. She could have passed by with royal indifference. Instead, she paused. "I hope you've learned to look beyond appearances, Tobias." "Yes, your Majesty," he whispered, head bowed. "Good," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "For one day you might find yourself facing someone who seems strange or different or perhaps even mad. And on that day, remember that kindness reveals more truth than judgment ever could." The return journey to the capital was filled with quiet reflection for both Thorian and Elara. The village that had once been the site of pain and rejection had been transformed into a place of healing and new beginnings. "What will the court historians write of us, do you think?" Elara asked as their carriage rolled through the countryside. "The mad king who found sanity in disguise? The peasant girl who became queen? They'll write what historians always write. The facts they can verify and interpretations that suit the times," Thorian replied, his fingers interlaced with hers. "But the truth of our story lives elsewhere. Where? In the changes we bring to Eldoria, in the way we govern with both head and heart, in the children we may one day teach to see beyond surfaces to the essence beneath." He lifted her hand to his lips. "And in the quiet moments between a king and queen who know each other's truest selves." In the years that followed, the kingdom of Eldoria flourished under the rule of King Thorian and Queen Elara. The royal couple became known for their unconventional approach to governance, establishing healing houses in every province based on Elara's knowledge, implementing reforms that ease a burden on farming communities, and most notably, instituting the tradition of royal disguise. Twice yearly, the king and queen would travel their realm in simple clothes, speaking directly with their people without the barrier of crown and protocol. It was whispered throughout the kingdom that any stranger one met might be royalty in disguise, a belief that transformed how the people of Eldoria treated one another. Elara's family eventually relocated to the capital, her father's carpentry skills finding appreciation in royal commissions, her mother becoming a respected advisor in the establishment of village healing centers. Young Lily grew into a confident young woman who would one day serve as royal ambassador, carrying her sister's message of compassionate understanding to neighboring kingdoms. On the 5th anniversary of their unusual marriage, Thorian and Elara returned once more to Riverstone, this time with their infant son cradled in the queen's arms. The village had transformed in their absence, prosperity evident in new buildings and bustling markets, pride visible in the way villagers carried themselves as they welcomed their monarchs. In the village square, now adorned with a fountain depicting a falcon taking flight, Thorian addressed the gathered crowd. 5 years ago, you saw a madman and pitied the woman who loved him, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. You could not see beyond the mask I wore, the disguise I had chosen, but one among you did. Elara stepped forward, their son sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. I stand before you not just as your queen, but as a woman who once faced the same choice many of you encountered daily, whether to judge by appearance or to look deeper, whether to follow convention or to trust your heart's wisdom. The crown I wear, Thorian continued, removing a circle of gold and holding it aloft, is merely metal and gem. The true crown, the one that matters, is invisible. It is woven from courage, compassion, and the willingness to see truth where others see only strangeness. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit throughout the village, their glow reflecting the tears of many, who had once mocked but now understood the profound lesson embodied by their king and queen. Later that night, as Elara stood on the balcony of the room prepared for their stay, ironically, the finest chamber in what had once been home of her most vocal critic Thorian joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They no longer mock, he observed, his breath warm against her ear. No, she agreed, leaning back against his strength. But had they not mocked then, we might never have discovered who we truly are together. He turned her gently to face him, the madman and his bride. The king and his queen, she corrected with a smile. Both, he said, touching his forehead to hers. Always both. And so the kingdom of Eldoria learned what the young herbalist had known from the beginning, that true vision comes not from the eyes but from the heart, that wisdom often wears a mask of madness, and that sometimes the greatest kings are those who remember what it means to be human.